will give kids a 3-year reprieve from predatory algorithms, toxic popularity meters, and harmful content manipulating Australian children. While we are now more than a month away from the law being enforced, we want families to have informed conversations about the changes ahead. eSafety has assessed, so today we are announcing the platforms that on 10 December will be subject to the social media minimum age laws. eSafety has assessed Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, X, Threads, Reddit and Kik as age-restricted platforms. This means from 10 December, these services must take reasonable steps to prevent under-16s from holding accounts, and failure to do so could warrant fines of up to $49.5 million. eSafety's platform assessments will be ongoing and respond to technological change, but we understand that families need certainty now, and now regarding the major platforms captured under the social media minimum age laws. We have met with several of the social media platforms in the past month so that they understand there is no excuse for failure to implement this law. Online platforms use technology to target children with chilling control. We are merely asking that they use that same technology to keep children safe online. We aren't chasing perfection, we are chasing a meaningful difference, because it is too important here not to try. The government has recently launched a national education campaign, and I encourage all Australians to engage with a range of resources now available on esafety.gov.au to help them understand the law. I want parents to have the ability to tell their children, it is against the law for me to let you use this platform. The statistics speak for themselves. The need to act is clear. More than 1 in 3 children reported that their most recent experience of cyberbullying came from a social media platform. And over 7 in 10 children have seen harmful content online. We want children to have a childhood, and we want parents to have peace of mind. And in naming these platforms today, we will provide that clarity for conversations ahead of 10 December. So thank you, and I'll ask Commissioner Julie Inman-Grant to speak.
Thank you so much, Minister Wells. Today, again, we are announcing the platforms we've assessed that, in our view, meet the criteria of age-restricted social media platforms from the 10th of December. This provides for transparency to parents about how these changes will impact them and their children. Now, these assessments are purely based on the criteria set out in the legislation, including the sole or significant purpose of the platform to enable online social interaction. The other key consideration for us is whether the platform meets the criteria of a class of services where there is an exception, such as for messaging, online gaming, or educational content. A few important points I want to make about this list. Technology is fast changing and ever evolving, which means this will never be a static list. Our work will continue. These assessments we have announced today are not a requirement of the legislation. eSafety, off our own bat, developed the self-assessment tools for industry to provide a template to ensure fair and consistent application of the legislative criteria to make sure there was no question. And I can talk to you about the technology playbook on denying that there's a problem, minimizing the scope of the problem. We don't have any underage users on our platforms. Claim that the technology isn't impossible, that it's not able to be achieved. But then we start to see a change when the legal and regulatory pressure ramps up, and all of a sudden we can discover a solution. Oh, 16 isn't such a novel age. Oh, we can target using our age inference technologies we've already been using for a decade. And in the end, when we are confident that the companies have indeed complied, we'll probably see some great PR about all the innovations they were able to achieve to achieve this end. 2 other things I want to reinforce. This is not a safety, a harms, or a risk-based assessment. These were criteria for assessment contained in the legislative rules. I will talk to you a little bit more about the platforms that met some of the exceptions, but this was not a compare and contrasting exercise. In order to be consistent and fair, We assessed each platform or service on its merits against the criteria in the legislative rules. And I want to say that this is a really potent solution, but not the only one in terms of how we're trying to keep the online world safer for children. We have promoted safety by design in cooperation with the companies since 2018, and we've ensured that safety by design, so assessing the risks and harms up front and embedding the safety protections rather than retrofitting at the end, are part of our mandatory codes and standards. We've, of course, have extensive information in terms of our resources in education, and we encourage parents to avail themselves to this. And this is a really important reminder that while December 10th will be a seminal day, parents can be empowered to have their conversations with kids now. They can start the chat and delete the apps today. What we help them work through is how they taper off their children's use, how they might be able to download the archives of information, their photos, their memories, how they can find influencers that you approve of online and other places. So remember, this isn't a comprehensive prohibition or ban. Young people will still be able to interact on messaging platforms. They'll be able to search the internet for information. They'll be able to use online gaming platforms. So they aren't going to be totally disconnected from communication or have their digital lifelines cut. And the minister and I recently met with a range of mental health and educational NGOs that helped ensure that when we were developing this guidance that we used language that was very empathetic, but will also take them to places that they can go to for help. And of course, this is an opportunity for all of us to take this into our own hands. And we'll see what happens on December 10th. As the minister said, we expect it will be significant. But the changes that impact our young people will be felt over a much longer period of time, which is why we are also working with a range of academics to evaluate the impacts. Are kids sleeping more? Are they out in the footy fields? Are they interacting more? And we'll also look for unintended consequences. And we'll be gathering an evidence base as other companies around the world look at what we're doing so that we can provide them the learnings from what we've already achieved and what we plan to achieve further.
We'll be very happy to take your questions.
Minister, my 7 and 9-year-olds are already telling me that they know how to get around this social media ban, which they're well aware of. They'll just go to the browser and rather than the app and be able to access it. How do you stop kids circumventing it in such a simple fashion?
Well, I think I'll let Julie speak to the ins and outs of the tech platforms in particular, but I've got lots to say about this. Firstly, kids will be kids. There will be kids today that manage to procure themselves alcohol despite the fact that it's against the law to buy alcohol if you're under 18 in Australia. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a law preventing under 18s from buying alcohol in Australia. This is about a cultural change and moving people away from having every single interaction they have as a 13-year-old, 12-year-old, 8-year-old being online and being in real life, trying to give them 36 months back to develop those relationships and develop that resilience themselves before giving them the opportunity of having a social media platform. I don't know if you wanted to speak to the ins and outs about how people will get around it, but I have been enjoying some of the social media content by recalcitrants in the run-up to 10 December, talking online about how they are under 16, they don't like the laws, this is how they're going to get around it, therefore identifying themselves as someone who is under 16 and their accounts are going to need to be deactivated. I would also point you specifically to when TikTok went offline for 24 hours in the States, people tried all kinds of methods to get around that, like VPNs, etc., and were in the vast majority unsuccessful.
I would just say a feature rather than a bug of the legislation was for young people to be able to engage in that content in a logged out state. Some of the conversations that we've had with the platforms who still use recommender engines and algorithms to determine what the logged out state content looks like, they shouldn't be surfacing up content that's appropriate for a 35-year-old man. They should be ensuring that it is appropriate. Well, you're looking at good 35.
Very generous.
So in any case, I'm not sure that you took the time to read our regulatory guidance, but we have pretty extensive requirements that we place back on the platforms themselves to prevent circumvention. So location-based circumvention in terms of the use of VPNs, but there are so many signals that they can and are picking up now, device IDs, who their ISP account is, where they've downloaded, from which app store. And in most cases, if you brought a phone for the United States and you download it from an app store, they will look at a 6-month period to see whether or not you're actually resident in Australia. We've had deep conversations with companies about this. I was in Silicon Valley talking to all of the major platforms. They're already doing this. They know they can do this. They know that this is their responsibility. And it's not just location-based circumvention. It's the use of accounts that may be pre-age verified. We could see a black market for that. But we also know generative AI, a mask, or graphics from platforms can be used to spoof AI or age verification systems. And we've given them very specific specifications as to how we think they should tackle. And they've given us comfort that this is something that they can do and what they will do in these cases when they think someone is using a VPN is just re-age verify. So it's not as big an issue. The last thing I would add is we're talking to a range of other platforms, and we're asking them to look for migratory patterns. So if there is a huge spike in blue sky, for instance, before or after, we expect them to come and talk to us about that. We can even look at the iTunes Store or Google Play, and we can see which are the most popular apps being downloaded. Right now, Yubo is one of them. Again, we're in conversations with them.
We're going here, and then here.
Minister, last week the AFP Commissioner talked about this really disturbing global phenomenon where Australian girls are being targeted by sadistic men. A lot of it is happening on platforms like Roblox. So why wasn't Roblox included? I understand it's a gaming platform, but given what the AFP Commissioner laid out last week, did that give you pause to rethink whether that platform would be included?
Well, we also deal with sadistic sextortion and financial sexual extortion on a daily basis. So it's obviously of great concern for us. Like I said, we've got codes and standards, and we've used this in our negotiations with Roblox. So based on that negotiation, by the end of this year, Roblox will be rolling out age assurance technologies here. Their primary user base are 5 to 13-year-olds, but it's a commingled platform. They know they're adults. So we asked them to take other specific steps, including not allowing adults to contact children without specific parental consent and putting on privacy at the highest default. So we're using other tools in our arsenal to keep these other platforms safer. And that's a really important question, because just because a platform is exempted through the legislative rules doesn't mean it's safe. We're trying to do other things through safety by design and our codes and standards to make sure they're safer. I just want to also mention that we used our codes and standards powers for the App Store codes with Apple and Google to deplatform a chat roulette site that was based in Portugal, who was non-responsive. A 14-year-old Queensland girl was groomed by a 40-year-old Australian pedophile on this platform, and he engaged in sadistic extortion, requiring her to perform on video even more explicit sexual acts for 2 of his friends. So this can happen on any platform. So we need to lift, a rising tide lifts all boats, but that's why we're using this as one tool. This is an age restriction for social media, but we have other tools that we're using for the rest of the industry, and our codes and standards cover 8 sectors of the technology industry.
Can you just clarify, is this the final list that will go of platforms covered at December 10? And are you sure that you've given enough time for Kik and Reddit? in this case to comply with the standards?
I'm happy to take that. As I said before, this is a dynamic list, and it will never change, and we've told it will always change. And we've told companies, so for instance, Roblox, as was just mentioned, some of these companies, when we did the assessment, were very much what I would say on the line. So we had to put our minds to what is the sole and significant purpose? Online gaming, right? But there's chat functionality. In the U.S., they've launched a program called Moments, which is very much like Stories, which is online social interaction. They market themselves as the first metaverse company, as being immersive. And so when we did the assessment, we said, and we also have to think about, would kids who are using Roblox today, they use the chat functionality and messaging so that they can online gameplay. If the online gameplay is the significant or sole purpose, if that were taken away, would the kids still use that messaging functionality to chat? Probably not. So that's just to give you some insight in terms of how much rigor that was done with each of the assessments. So we've said to the companies, you need to continue to self-assess. The burden is on them, but we will be watching as well. And if they start rolling out features that look more like they're becoming a social media company than an online gaming company, then we will seek to capture them, which is exactly what I did with OpenAI. I met with them a week or two before they announced the release of Sora. It was never mentioned to me. It was framed as a social AI-generated social media app. So I've sent them the self-assessment tool. And this is where we can't, we're trying to remediate the harms today. Obviously, with social media, we're trying to remediate the harms that were created more than 20 years ago. We also have to keep a watchful gaze or an eye on the future and look at how all of these technologies are converging, because I happen to believe that if the proper guardrails aren't put around AI, they could bring much greater harms.